also in the comments of one of the videos, someone said, well, it doesn't seem that Survivor is important to the Patternist series. And let me tell you why it's important, because you haven't read it. So a lot of people really don't know why it's important. So the reason that Survivor is important to the overall Patternist series, and anyone who has read The Seed to Harvest or has read the entire series, they notice a very jarring jump in narrative, right? Or in understanding, like, something has happened that I don't know has happened. Therefore, I don't like Clay's art. That's what a lot of people say, including myself. And so when we're approaching the Patternist series, Wild Seed, Mind of My Mind, Survivor, Clay's Arc, and Patternmaster, when you're approaching this series, when you're missing Survivor, you're missing a key point of the narrative. And here's what I mean. Let me walk you through the narratives. In Wild Seed, we have the backstory of the progenitors, Anyanwu and Doro. Doro is a body snatching entity. And what I mean by body snatching is that he can touch you and force your soul from your body. And he will walk around carrying your flesh. He will walk around in your flesh. But once he speaks, everyone knows it's him, right? So this is the progenitor. He stumbles across Anyanwu, and she moves with him from Africa to the United States. And they go through the U.S. in this story, a very toxic story at times, but she learns about herself in very unique ways. Now, Anyanwu is a shapeshifter. She's lived hundreds of years by this point, and so she's not as what she seems. So she's not as young as she appears, or she's not, you know, sometimes she wears an old body, sometimes she wears a young body, right? But these two in Wild Seed, their story sets the tone for the entire series because the entire series starts with them. So at the end of Wild Seed, something is going on and Anyanwu decides they're going to move west to California. And this is where Mind of My Mind picks up with Mary, who is now the protagonist. So in a sense, Anyanwu fades into the back. She is the matriarch now. And we have Doro still trying to create this race of superhuman beings that he was trying to create in Wild Seed. But he didn't hyper focus on telepaths in Wild Seed. Telepaths, which we see a lot of in Mind of My Mind, were dangerous failures, right? They were the people who were unruly. They killed one another. They could not care for their young because of their mental sensitivity. So these are the people that Doro felt were failures. But Mary, in Mind of My Mind, was his last hope. He needed her to come successfully through a transition from an ordinary girl to a superhuman telepath or super capable telepath. And he needed her because she was a rare experimental model. They actually call her the Queen Bee in there. And she's a black girl, right? She's a black girl with traffic light green eyes. She successfully goes through this transition. And as a result of successfully going through transition, she also forms this thing known as the pattern. Now, the pattern is the mental web that connects all other telepaths together. Before then, they were just individual telepaths, but something happened with Mary's transition that not only allowed her to transition into a telepath, but create a network or a net, if we want to think of it like that, to hold other telepaths together. So just think of me as Mary, and now as I've undergone transition, I have lines to all of you all watching me. All of y'all are connected to me because I've undergone transition and you all are telepaths too. So that's how we can think of Mary. So everything is surrounding Mary when she undergoes transition. The issue with that is that Doro is not a telepath. He is their progenitor, right? But he cannot read minds, and they cannot read his mind because Doro's mind is unreadable. He's kind of like God in the series. Nonetheless, when we're thinking about this, what ends up happening in this narrative of Patternmaster is that the telepaths move from being on the margins of society. Now they're in the middle. They're the center of society because now they can brain hack. And by brain hack, they can change your thoughts in a minute. They control government. They control education. They control everything. They rise as this superhuman race. But in Butler's interviews, she's clear that they are not good people. So we have this young protagonist. She's like 19. And she's holding all of these super powerful telepaths in her web. And they hate it because they've been telepaths for a long time. Some of them are white men. They hate being connected to a young black woman. There's a lot of racial stuff going on in there. But they cannot beat her because she is the holder of the pattern. You cannot take the person who can take you out, right? So when we're in this book, this book really starts to kind of contemplate or walk you through how these telepaths rise to power. The fascinating thing, though, is that they have to kill their progenitor. They have to take out Doro. Doro does not want them to, he doesn't want them to expand as fast as they are. And he tries to halt their expansion project. But the issue is that they can't halt it. The reason they can't halt it is because Mary needs all of their energy. She needs more energy. She needs to continue consuming their energy in order to survive and advance the pattern. So she cannot stop this breeding project, if we want to call it that. But Doro's like, no, y'all gonna stop it and I don't care nothing about it, or I'm gonna take you out of here, Mary. So y'all, he tried to take her out of there, but it doesn't work. No one has ever been able to defeat Doro. The only way that they were able to she was able to defeat Doro is with the help of the pattern. You have by the end of the narrative, it was about almost 1,600 telepaths feeding life energy into her. So he couldn't kill her, but she, in their fight, kind of consumes him and he becomes part of the pattern. And as a result of him becoming part of the pattern, she dissolves him. Like, he's done. He's done. And so Mary becomes, the pattern holder. She is the queen bee. Let me also say that because they were controlling humans who did not have psionic ability, which is telepathy, the humans were used as slaves in a way. They were forced to take care of the telepath children. They would do all of the hard labor. They were literally, the telepath community was built on the backs of people who did not have telepathy, right? So when we get to Survivor, they're called missionaries. That's the book that they're in space. They leave. So we don't know this in Survivor. You only know this if you go to Butler's papers, where you see the backstory or her thought process. But anyway, in Survivor, they leave in ships and they go off to space, and they're called missionaries because all they had to turn to was faith in that moment. You also learn that as a result of a lot of them went into hiding in forests and things like that to try to escape the Patternists. The society turned really dark, apparently, for the humans. And they want to go to space to colonize space because they want to create a place of their own. The only issue is that there are other intelligent life forms, or you can call them aliens, there that's not going for it. They're not going for it. They're like, absolutely not. They're really big. They're called the Khan species. They're the Garkon and the Tikon. These species are like, you humans are unintelligent. You're not smart. You're not going to come here to colonize our society. And they take the missionaries captive. But you do have a black woman protagonist, Elena, Octavia's first Afronaut. And I call her Afronaut because she's the first black woman in space that we see from Butler's papers, right? And so you have this, she basically saves the humanity of, the future of the missionaries up there. But she's up there, and we're learning that their mental conditioning that they went through under the telepathic community has not worn off. They have been colonized, and their brains have been colonized so badly that they could not survive as an independent group. So Butler, in Mind of My Mind, she's showing you what's happening. And in Survivor, she shows you the impacts of what happened in Mind of My Mind on humans. Granted, the entire series does not necessarily privilege humans, but they are there. And that's what my article on Survivor that's in Melis talks about. Like, we need to look at the long lasting impacts of colonization on the minds of people. And so with that being said, once we are in space, we're in Patternist approved spaceships. When you get to Clay's arc, you know that a spaceship has come back to Earth. But without Survivor, you don't know, where did this spaceship come from? Why were they in space, right? This doesn't make sense. So when you encounter that, immediately you're like, I don't like this. Something's not right here. And Clay's arc was the last book that Butler wrote. And in a video last night, I talked about why she named Clay's Ark, right? Because and I'm gonna just recap it here just in case people didn't see it. Clay Dana was a minor character in Mind of My Mind. He was the brother of a telepath, and Mary was able to push him through transition, and he learned how to fly. In Butler's papers, it tells us that Clay Dana sold his gifts to a space station, and we assume it's NASA. And literally, they begin to replicate that power to use it as the technology to power spaceships. So when we get to Clay's Ark, the spaceship that comes back is a Clay Ark ship. And why do we call it Clay's Ark? Because it's powered by the technology of Clay Dana. Is that clear? So when we get there, we learn that in Clay's Ark, we literally begin to learn that, okay, this astronaut has come back to space when he wasn't supposed to, and he has an alien organism attached to him or in his body at this point. This organism forces them to undergo a certain type of, what do I want to call it? Quarantine period. And after the quarantine period, what ends up happening is that his body starts to transform. So he ultimately becomes a Clay Ark. A Clay Ark is a being with an animal body and human head, right? So kind of like a sphinx, if you want to think of it like that, but they're more like kangaroo cat-like beings in Clay's Ark, right? And so it's weird to see them because this is the first time you're seeing a body transform. You're also seeing people fight with their humanity or fight to hold on to their humanity when an organism is demanding that you do certain animalistic things, right? It's forcing you to do it. Like it's forcing you to scratch people. It's forcing you to commit violence. You cannot resist this organism because the organism is intelligent. All of that matters because if you don't know why were we in space in the first place, you would be like, nah, I don't like Clay's Ark. And I think that that's what kind of diminished the series, right? Or Clay's Ark in the series, because you don't have Survivor to help bridge that backstory of why we're in space in the first place and what happened there. And so I think Butler was short-sighted in rescinding the text, but I respect authorial decisions. I ain't Octavia Butler, but as a scholar who has spent a lot of time in her work, I think it kind of diminished the effect of Clay's Ark. And then we get to Patternmaster, the last book of the series, but the first book she ever wrote. And the male, I think, yeah, the protagonist is a man. She, in her paper, she says that this was kind of like her boyfriend. Like he lived in her head for a long time. They had this like love affair. She had spent years imagining him. And so, it wasn't hard to write this book because this story lived in her mind for so many years. And so what's very interesting in Patternmaster is that we see that the Clay Arks and the Patternists are at war. Now, remember I just said this is the first book she ever wrote in 1976, right? But when we get to this book, we see that there is a war going on. The Patternists are at war with the Clay Arks. The Patternists are used to controlling humans, right? Those mutes, those missionaries that we see in other texts, but they can't control the Clay Arks because the Clay Ark mind is no longer human. So the Clay Ark has an advantage at this point because they have great range of shot. They're really good with weapons. They're also really good at smell. They can smell out a human body. Now, the telepaths still have human bodies. So if a Clay Ark gets close enough to the telepath, they're done. Kill them immediately. And so we also know in Patternmaster that the Patternist at this point is dying because he has been shot by a Clay Ark. So he's trying to get one of his sons to quickly come to California. I think it's Forsyth, if I'm not mistaken. To relieve him because he is dying. And also it's so interesting that the Patternists were very hierarchical and they also would take out their own kin. And so we learn that the main Patternist or the Patternmaster, if we want to say that, has married his sister to stop her from competing with him. So there's some, incest there. But yeah, I just wanted to explain that backstory for people who were interested or curious, like, why did we need Survivor? And it may not even be important. No, it is important.